Well, continuing our artistic theme this morning, I'd like to introduce Nalini Paul, who was the George Mackay Brown Writing Fellow in Orkney from 2009 to 2010. Nalini is a keen walker, like myself, and a lover of the outdoors, and her writing touches on themes of migration, memory, and landscapes. She was born in India, grew up in Vancouver, and has been living in Scotland for 20 years. Her first poetry pamphlet, Skirlax, Redwood Squirrel Press, was shortlisted for the Callum MacDonald Award in 2010, and she's collaborated with artists, musicians and dancers, having written for stage and film. And a very interesting example here, she has a limited edition artist book of her poem about the Norse explorer Krap Floki, who has a link to Shetland. It was purchased by the National Gallery of Modern Art for the Special Books collection. And Nalini teaches creative writing in Edinburgh and Glasgow. Thank you, Nalini.
Thank you. And I've brought the book with me, which I'll read from later. Okay. So, since writing my abstract, I'm sure a lot of you have had this experience where you attend other papers and then you change things a little bit. So I wrote my abstract a few months ago, I'm sure it was now. So I've added a title to my paper, which is The Journey and the Gyre, and I'll explain that a little bit as we go along. So being and becoming is mentioned in the abstract, and the main focus or thesis of the paper draws from this. However, the theoretical aspect is now more narrowly focused to what is known as a constructionist view of ethnicity. And this is something I covered in my PhD thesis, which I'll talk about in a moment. So my paper for today is a creative as well as an academic journey that weaves a strand, it's mainly one strand, of my PhD thesis with extracts of Jean Rhys's fiction, Norse folklore, and poetry, including my own. My PhD thesis examined Rhys's 5 novels exploring issues of identity, home, and belonging in light of post-colonialist theories, psychoanalysis, feminist theories, and film theory. Although that sounds like a lot, they do actually overlap quite a bit. Okay. So the ports of call, as it were, that we're going to visit on this journey include the West Indies, British Columbia in Canada, where I grew up, and Shetland and Orkney. So I'm going to start the journey in the West Indies, where the novelist Jean Rhys was born in 1890 and where she grew up before moving to England, living in different parts of Europe, including Paris. Rhys's novel, Wild Sargasso Sea, published in 1966 when she was 76 years old, tells the story of the mad woman in the attic, a character that you'll all be familiar with from Charlotte Bronte's 19th century novel, Jane Eyre. Rhys felt that this character was portrayed unfairly. She was insane, without a voice, and depicted as an animal. And interestingly, all of these factors were directly attributed to her ethnicity as a white Creole woman, and I will explain what that ethnicity is. Having shared the same ethnicity, Rhys decided she would, quote, write her a life. The Sargasso Sea is a region, as I'm sure you all know, is a region in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, situated in a gyre, which is a large system of rotating ocean currents and large wind movements. It is bound on the west by the Gulf Stream, on the north by the North Atlantic Current, on the east by the Canary Current, and on the south by the North Atlantic Equatorial Current. It is 700 miles wide and 2,000 miles long, and is called the Sargasso Sea because of the huge amounts of sargassum seaweed that float on its surface. The larvae of both the European eel and the American eel hatch there and go to Europe or the east coast of North America, so they go in opposite directions. But later in life, they return to the Sargasso Sea to lay their eggs. Jean Rhys was a white Creole. A definition of Creole appears in the notes of a book called Éloge de la Créolité, or In Praise of Creoleness. And I'll just read that. The word Creole seems to come from the Spanish word crio, itself deriving from the Latin verb creare, which means to raise, to educate. The Creole is the person who was born and raised in the Americas and who is not a native like American Indians. Very soon this term was applied to all the human races, all the animals and plants transported to America from 1492 onwards. There was therefore a mistake in French dictionaries which, from the beginning of the 19th century, reserved the word Creole for the white Creoles or Béké only. Béké is West Indian French patois for a white person or white people. A white Creole therefore appears white, but may also have some African ancestry. Often this was overlooked in what is known as passing, where an individual deliberately ignores the possibility of any African blood in his or her ancestry. And that's a phenomenon that occurs with other ethnic groups. Jewish people would do that as well by changing their name. And it's a way of belonging, I suppose, being accepted in a particular culture. Jean Rhys's female protagonists often feel ambivalent about England and Englishness, as well as about the West Indies. So interestingly, although she was born and raised in the West Indies and felt at home there, it could also be quite a hostile place in terms of the landscape, and she didn't feel as though she quite fit in. In her short story, The Day They Burned the Books, for example, the child narrator, like many white Creoles, conjures up a romanticized notion of the country she has never visited. To say that my main forms that I'm going to look at for this paper are poetry, folklore, and literary theory for my thesis. So, sorry about that. Okay. They romanticized these England, a place they often had never been visited. So this is a quote from that story by Rhys, The Day They Burned the Books. London, the beautiful rosy-cheeked ladies, the theatres, the shops, the fog, the blazing cold fires in winter, the exotic food, white bait, eaten to the sound of violins, strawberries and cream. The word strawberries always spoke with guttural and throaty sound, which we imagine to be the proper English pronunciation. Anna, in Voyage in the Dark, on the other hand, chooses to subvert the dominant discourse of Englishness in which she finds herself, a white West Indian woman living in London in the 1920s, a chorus girl dependent on the favours of men in order to afford luxuries such as silk stockings and pretty coats. And so this is quite largely autobiographical for Rhys. She falls in love with Walter Jeffreys, an Englishman whom she could never marry because of class differences. It is ironic that Anna, like Rhys herself, had come from an affluent background in the West Indies, only to be regarded as inferior while in England and rejected by middle-class Englishness. Rhys's father was a Welsh doctor and her mother a white Creole. She had lived in a large house and her father ultimately had benefited from slavery. It is her memories of that other place which Anna turns to for a sense of affirmation and which make her feel alive. And then I tried to remember the road that leads to Constance estate, the sandbox tree outside the door at home, and the horse waiting. You ride in a sort of dream. The saddle creaks sometimes, and you smell the sea and the good smell of the horse. The feeling of the hills comes to you, cool and hot at the same time. Everything is green. Everywhere, things are growing. There's never one moment of stillness, always something buzzing. And in this next short extract, Anna goes to the countryside for a few days in England, and it reminds her of the West Indies, although it's completely different. But she's trying to conjure up a memory of this place that's so different. I used to try to imagine a night when the crack-crack's going, and I think crack-cracks must be crickets or some kind of insect. It's quite hard to find what that actually means. But I know in French it's to do with a sound. It's an onomatopoeic word, so I assume it's an insect that makes a noise. The veranda long and ghostly, the hammock and the 3 chairs and a table with a telescope on it, and the crack-cracks going all the time. The moon and the darkness and the sound of the trees, and not far away the forest where nobody had ever been, virgin forest. We used to sit on the veranda with the night coming in huge, and away it smells of all flowers. And then, this is really curious, in brackets and in quotes, this place gives me the creeps at night, Hester would say. And Hester is her English stepmother. So the metaphorical journey that takes place is one in which I, as a poet, I am putting myself into this, find myself belonging to more than one culture simultaneously, so that home is not a fixed place. To quote Robert Burns, "My heart is in the Highlands," or to coin another well-known adage, home is where the heart is. Home, therefore, is a state of mind rather than a literal place. This can be based, of course, on memories of the first home, of childhood, loss of innocence, and the emergence into adulthood. Likewise, a sense of self is not always something fixed, and therefore determined, whether by national identity or ethnicity. A term I choose to favour is subjectivity. This suggests that one's self is a subject position, a relation to one's environment, and in many cases, the individual has the freedom to choose her connection to a given place. My own journey has brought me from India to which I don't remember anything about because I was only 2.5 when we moved to Canada, but I still have family there and I've visited a couple of times and I do feel a strong connection to the place, even though I don't have any actual memories of it. Anyway, the journey has brought me from India to Canada, which obviously will form most of my memories because I grew up there from when I had my very first memories, although I think my first memory was on the plane journey. I do have some images of that. India to Canada to Scotland, including Orkney, and I consider Orkney as much more of a home than Glasgow, where I currently live, and I only lived in Orkney for 13 months, and I didn't know anybody there at the time, but it's one of these inexplicable things. So the notion of home for me does not have to be limited to one place. Ambivalence or feeling conflicted or in two minds about a place often happens too. So sometimes it's like Jean Rhys, it's not that Canada was, all wonderful either, in the same way that for her the West Indies didn't completely belong. But this ambivalence creates an interesting tension between belonging and not belonging, or even alienation. In my poem, Harvest, the present tense is set in Glasgow, and the ice cream van takes the narrator back to her past in Canada, albeit briefly, before a Scottish voice returns her to the present. So, Harvest. Lime trees weep syrup, the garden bench is occupied. Biscuit-coloured tenements glare in too much light. The ice cream van tinkle tonks. Wind up the little bend clock tight, metal against your thumb. Run down wooden steps, each flight a chapter, decades fall. Pinch your quarter and dime, lawns and sprinklers shine, rose gardens, tree houses, basketball hoops, swings between cherry and plum. Leaves buzz on the branch like the sting of scraped knees. The fudgesicle sticks to your fingers like thyme, or feet to linoleum. The ice cream truck drives off again. Then a voice says, "There's a wee treat for you, hen. You savor the August dip like the sun." As Joan Nagel states in Constructing Ethnicity, a constructionist view of ethnicity is one of a dynamic, constantly evolving property, which is not a fixed state of being, based, for example, on one's skin color. Peter McLaren states, quotes, "White culture is not monolithic, and its borders must be understood as malleable and porous." End quotes. So a constructionist view of ethnicity suggests that whiteness itself is always in a state of flux and fibrillation and must be seen as cultural, as processual, and not ontologically different from processes that are not white. And so just wanted to acknowledge a wonderful paper that Andrew Jennings gave earlier about this fluidity between the Shetland and the Inuit, where it's almost impossible to trace the beginning of where that fluidity started in terms of that intercultural connection that we gave an example of with the music. So, according to this theory, one can choose items of cultural content and reinvent one's past as well as creating and influencing the present. Chetan Bhatt argues in her article, Ethnic Absolutism and the Authoritarian Spirit, that the notion of identity itself is problematic because many identity theorists treat it as if it has ontological status. So just to define ontological, if we have as you probably know this already, but You might have an edition of a book, such as Jane Eyre, but my copy of that book is the one that I've written all over, so that's my ontological copy that I can say, okay, this is mine, and that's, so ontological is something that you can touch and identify and point to, and that's it, and it's usually the only one that exists of its kind, but that's basically what ontology is. So, right, so often these things change through migrations and contact with other cultures. So I'm just going to read you this poem by me. It's based on a Shetland folklore. I believe it is a Shetland myth that it's a story that the storyteller Tom Weir told me in Orkney when I was based there, and it's beautifully illustrated, and I can show it to you later, but I'll just read it. It's about Raff and Floki, who made the first journey, as I'm sure you all know, from the first Norsemen to sail from Norway to Iceland. And yes, and he came to his daughter met with a tragic end. Raff and Floki, and Raffin means raven. The raven explorer steals 3 chicks in feather black night. They fly and return to their captor's voice, unwritten ink in the well. Time grows wings to cut the air, beaks tear through deathbeat, make show to talk. Raffin's need for navigation from Norway to Iceland fuels the ship. A cage gives views of stars. 2 months gone, the day as blue as Raffin's eyes, he sets the birds loose. The first flies back to the Faroes, the second circles high, then drops and sticks to the mast. The third and last is blue-black glistened, seeking land to fill its hunger and Raffin's greed. The speck fades and fades. Weeks later, Iceland appears. They dance and drink under the stars on the raven's moonlit wings. In Shetland, Raffin's daughter Gerhild wears her favourite red dress. She sees a raven dancing in the sunlit woods. It flaps and hops like a toy, flies a few feet, then stops. Gerhild follows her latest joy, a red dot chasing a black smudge across the page of her life. The raven stops again to tease, then wing beats echo her heart. At the loch edge, it hovers and flies, away from black depths. Gerhild, 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 the sound of blood rushes in the ears. The red dress floats like a fallen sail, her body unmarked, an angel asleep. When father and mother fall to earth and tear their hair, tears come late as the sun goes out, a sudden blur of salt water. The raven flies past Raffin, a black mark against his name. Then clarity comes, and the mother's retribution for stolen chicks, a stolen child. So that was the mother raven of the chicks that Raffin had stolen. Journeys by water can be transformative. As the eels born in the Sargasso Sea migrate to Europe or to North America, they also return to their point of origin, suggesting that perhaps something of origins does, after all, remain. With humans, however, there is always choice, as Anna in Voyage in the Dark chooses to remember home and how she identifies herself with her new environment. The individual has the power to change her identity. According to Veronica Gregg's book, Jean Rhys's Historical Imagination, Rhys's writing stresses the permeability of boundaries, including social, ideological, and literary, which, quotes, construct the fiction of the individual self. Therefore, ethnicity, like any narrative, is largely constructed. We decide and create our own identities, choosing to focus, for example, on the linear ancestry. This is a bit controversial, and I don't have the academic knowledge to back this up, but just bear with me. This is we may choose to focus on a linear ancestry that might possibly date one's ancestors to Neolithic Orkney, rather than the innumerable variations that do in fact and could easily take place, which do in fact exist and could easily place anyone's ancestry to locations such as Asia, North America, and Africa. Ancestry, after all, is not linear. I mean, it is to a point, but using phylogeny, It is clear that ancestry is also informed by cousins, second cousins, aunts, uncles, and so on. And all of those related to us by way of our extended families from both the maternal and paternal sides, horizontally, as it were, rather than vertically. So I'm just going to quickly tell you this story from North American folklore, and I'm interested in the Haida, who were the indigenous people who settled on what is now the Queen Charlotte Islands off the northwest coast of North America. So the raven, or the crow, sometimes a raven, sometimes a crow, is the trickster who can change form. In this particular story, the raven steals daylight from a man who owns it, and daylight is just an orb of light, and he hides it in a box of 5 boxes, a box within a box within a box, and his daughter goes to the stream to get some water, and Raven really wants this daylight, so he transforms himself into a pine needle and lands on the stream just as she's collecting the water in her bucket or whatever. And so as she's walking back, she takes a drink, and the pine needle goes into her system, and then he transforms into a fetus, and she gives birth to a human son. And then the raven, who is taking the form of a boy, becomes the apple of his grandfather's eye, and his grandfather will do anything to indulge whatever he wants. So he keeps begging for the box. So he does give it to him over a period of time, each box, until he eventually relents and lets him have the central box. And as soon as he opens that, and he transforms back into a raven and grabs the daylight with his beak and flies out through an open window. As he's in the air flying, he gets into a tussle with Eagle, and they're struggling, and he drops the ball of light. It breaks and forms the moon, and the other half shatters into what then form the stars. So I've written this poem inspired by that. Crow, you are a living shadow, whose darkness made daytime brighter. Your call was forced from that black, croaky place, like midnight purpling itself into dawn, a slow, sad, time-stilling song. No melody sprung from your throat, just a caw that even the ducks mocked. But the echo returns, far off and white. Sorry. The echo returns far off and white, a winter's full moon that you broke into stars, the bones of a creature licked clean, a lamb dying under a tree with marble black eyes and a head full of grief. You wait for the prize, fluttering soot and ashes, and the black on white typescript of words that tried to contain you. The coal-stained sweetness that will turn up diamonds in time. And I just want to end with this poem by George Mackay Brown. So we're ending the journey where we began, with the sea. And this is on the shore. And this time you've got the remains of different journeys and different selves. Beach corner. Monday, I found a boot, rust and salt leather. I gave it back to the sea to dance in. Tuesday, a spar of timber worth 30 bob. Next winter, it will be a chair, a coffin, a bed. Wednesday, a half can of Swedish spirits. I tilted my head. The shore was cold with mermaids and angels. Thursday, I got nothing. Seaweed, a whalebone, wet feet, and a loud cough. Friday, I held a seaman's skull, sand spilling from it, the way time is told on kirkyard stones. Saturday, a barrel of sodden oranges. A Spanish ship was wrecked last month at the Cape. Sunday, for fear of the elders, I sit on my bunk. What's heaven? A sea chest with 1,000 gold coins. Thank you.
Thank you, Nalini. It was very, very thought-provoking, and I'm particularly interested in the raven thing. I did on Facebook, my spirit animal is a raven. So those who were at this particular talk, is there any question? One question before we move on to the next one, or any comments? Seems to be. So thanks again. Thank you.